Hello and welcome to Lenric's realm. I am Matt, and in this video we are going to put the loon back into the Loonshrine. If you have followed me for the past weeks, you may be aware that I'm currently working on my first army for Warhammer Age of Sigmar, my Gloomspite Gitz. I really like the idea of dozen little heel-biters rushing heroic demigods, swarming naked dwarves and bringing down civilized societies. It's ultimately a wacky army in style and theme, and I really appreciate the range of minis that this army offers. There is only one small or, well, big exception that doesn't really vibe with me. The central terrain piece, the Loonshrine. It begins with strange storms that tear the sky and fill it with cloud tatters like a grotling's ragged cloak. Then comes the bad moon, looming through the broken clouds. The fungus bursts forth then, and the ground shakes and shudders like a sickening beast. Out comes the grotlings, and as they spill forth, down come the bad moon fangs. They plummet like rocky rain upon them doomed lands below. The grotlings come scurrying, the grotlings set to carving. Before long, what fell as a mound of shapeless glowing rock becomes a ghastly face. Loonshrines they call them, but I'd say their name is death itself. This little piece of story from the Gloomspite Gitz army book shows how weird and wacky but also terrifying these shrines are. But for me the model doesn't really reflect that. The story also shows how they are constructed, another thing the model does not show. So I thought to myself, what if this, quote, ghastly face was just the first step? What if the goal of the builders was a strange moon statue with arms and even legs? And what if the Loonshrine is still under construction? With that idea in my head, I went to my mini factory and looked for something that could serve as rocky appendages. I'm well aware of Games Workshop's policy in regards to 3D printing, but I don't plan to go to any official tournaments with this, so I don't really care about that. Anyway, I found something that looked fitting. The arms of this earth elemental looked perfect. The right arm especially intrigued me because it was essentially just a big rock. In the context of the story, this would look like a part that is still a work in progress. So I printed both arms at 200% with my filament printer. Sadly, I don't own a resin printer, but in this case I have an idea for hiding those pesky layer lines. I also printed a fitting round base for the shrine. The shrine doesn't come with one, and I just like to have everything neat and tidy on a base. I followed the first step in the instructions until the shrine was almost done. Only the cages in the back and the mushroom details were left out at this point. I wasn't quite sure what the build would ultimately look like, and I didn't want the details getting in the way. Now to really start with the conversion. On the rock arms I cut off the joints. This way they would align more neatly to the rock base of the shrine. I also pinned the arms to give them a stronger connection to the shrine. Before I glued them to place, I needed to make some real estate for them, so I started to cut some of the mushrooms of the rock base. I know this is a scary thing to do, cutting into a perfectly new and, well, expensive piece of plastic. But just like painting minis, sometimes you need to take a leap of faith into your own abilities. Really, the worst thing that can happen is that you learn something out of a mistake. With this in mind, I glued the arms into place. Now there were gigantic gaps, so I filled them with a big chunk of milliput. This two-part epoxy putty helps also with the adherence between the shrine and its new arms. I let it cure and glued the whole piece to the base. With air drying clay, I hid the seams between the base and the shrine. The curing of air drying clay can take a while, especially if you applied it in thicker chunks. So I left it for the time being and went back the following day. Now I had another big step ahead of me. As I already said, I printed the arms with a filament printer, so I did have some layer lines that were clearly visible. To hide them and give the rocky structures a bit more texture, I used my mixture of tile grout with PVA and water. This stuff is great for hiding layer lines, especially if these are ruins, walls or, like in this case, rock. I covered the arms, the milliput seams and the rock base of the plastic model with this stuff. This took another while to set and dry. Now, to underscore the idea that this shrine is still under construction, I needed some simple scaffolding. Popsicle sticks have a great in-scale size for 28mm wood planks. So I cut a few to size, beveled and sanded the edges and glued them to sticks from the local flora. I let the PVA set, and after that I scratched wood grain into the planks. To add these platforms to the shrine, I attached wires to wood sticks that would serve as posts for the scaffolding. Just like with the arms, the wires would reinforce the superglue bond between plastic model and wood structure. After attaching the scaffolding, I also glued in the remaining mushrooms of the kit. I adhered to the instructions in some cases, while in others I glued them to wherever I felt they would fit the best. Because the grout texture mix covered a lot of the polystyrene, I couldn't use plastic cement, so I also pinned some of the mushrooms and glued them in place with superglue. Now I could add the texture paste I use on all my Gitz. I covered the ground with the base and every part of the models where fungus would come out of the ground, rock or face, just to have a bit more believable transition between rock and mushroom. I also added fine turf all over the model. On my goblin bases, this stuff represents tiny mold or fungus, and here it also helps with the transition to the bigger mushrooms. When it comes to painting, my first step with my Gitz in general is to prime the whole model black and then to add colors via the airbrush. I mostly use a combination of Molotov paints that have a high coverage and transparent inks from Liquitex. Both lines are great for the airbrush because you don't have to thin them down at all. So I used these tried and tested paints on my shrine as well. I painted the face of the shrine in ochre and added simple shadows with turquoise ink. After that I went in and reinforced the yellow tone a bit with, well, yellow ink. The base was dusted with an application of light blue. This is also the same color I used for the mushrooms, so they were painted in the same color as well. As a last airbrush step, I gave the rocky parts and the ground a layer of transparent magenta. Now for the brushwork, I started with re-establishing the black undertone for the wood planks. I have a go-to slab job kind of method for the wood, so I need the scaffolding to be completely black. These platforms were then dry brushed with a sandy white tone. After that I went in and applied sap green ink and raw umber. For the rocks I dry brushed on medium flash and after that ferrite flash, both from Vallejo. The metallic parts were based with a reddish brown, in this case red oxide by Chimera. After that I stippled and dry brushed on hammered copper and gunmetal, both also by Vallejo. I wanted a rusty, worn look for my metallic parts, and I was inspired by a method described by Trent Denison's video about worn metals. If you want to have a look at the video, I definitely recommend it. You'll find the link down below. As one of the last steps, I painted the two little critters I put on the model. This moon with leg spider thing, which sits on the fist of the shrine, and the snail that climbs on one side of the loon face. I wanted to use colors that would be complementary to the underground. So I painted the snail with violet tones, and I used more yellowish tones for the moon spider on the violet fist. These craters that were all over the model were simply primed in hexed lichen and then dry brushed with medium flash. I went back with the airbrush and reinforced the bluish glow of all the mushrooms on the piece. I also dry brushed all the mushrooms and the fine turf with sky blue. In the end, I applied a violet oil wash on the moon face part. I let that settle for a few minutes and removed the unwanted paint with sponges and waited for the whole piece to dry. And with that, the Loonshrine is ready for battle. I really am glad I took this step and I customized this, because I really think the wackness of the standard model is a bit lacking. The arms really add to the stupidity of this thing, and I mean that in a good way. Gloomspite Gitz are the ultimate comic relief in Age of Sigmar, and this should be reflected all over the range. And as an added benefit, now this Loonshrine looks interesting from all the angles and doesn't look so flat from the front and the back. Thank you for watching, and if you liked the video, please leave a like and subscribe. Also, I am interested if you have dipped your toes into customizing your models. What was it? And if not, why not? Let me know in the comments. I really hope to see you in the next one, and until then, farewell, fellow adventurers.